To revive the economy, we need to track the revival of consumption. Now, Nielsen, in its fifth report tracking demand today, has shown some very interesting trends. Among them is the resurgence and the focus of a revival of demand in Middle India that they define as outside large metros but not rural India, mid-sized cities, you could say. Another very important observation is how an increase in demand in the months of June and July has sort of tapered off in August. In fact, to speak on this, I'm joined now by Diptanshu Ray from Nielsen and, of course, Mayank Shah from Parle. Welcome to both of you. Diptanshu, give us a sense of what this report, your latest report, is telling us and the trajectory it's sort of drawing over the last 6 months.
Thanks, Tamanna. Thanks for inviting me and hi, Mayank. So today the report that we talked about today was primarily on the behavioral reset that we see in the Indian economy and the Indian FMCG market, right? From the beginning of the pandemic, what we had observed was that the news of the COVID-19 transmission was more or less driving the FMCG market. What we told now is that after having studied the trends for the last 6 months, what we observe now that it is no more the news of the COVID-19 transmission, rather the emergence of a socio-economic construct and behavioral reset that is driving the FMCG market now. And the point to note over there is the basket reset that we talked about, weighted by the affordability reset, which is going to drive the FMCG market. In that context, we talked about the Middle India, which is driving the strategic priorities.
Tell me specifically about the difference you've seen between the months of July and August, because this is a broader theme that we have noticed even in high frequency data, etc., that the kind of upward progress of revival that we were making in June, July has tapered off in August. Would you say that this is a correct interpretation of your numbers in terms of consumer demand for FMCG?
June and July were actually what we saw in June and July was actually the pent-up demand in the FMCG market. So with the unlock, we saw suddenly a resurgence of purchase that has happened. The consumers wanted to stock it up. The items which they are not stocking in the earlier months. It is more of a pent-up demand. August is more of the normal, right? So that's exactly what the market is.
Mayank, let me come to you and what your observations on ground has been. We've been speaking often and time and again on consumer demand. Do you see a change between July and August? What are the trends you kind of see on September? What is the feedback that you've been getting?
Okay. So I'll talk FMCG and more so about foods. What we've seen is for us, there was, a surge in demand that we saw going on from April to May. And of course, June, July peaked. But that, as I said, we're talking about unprecedented times, unprecedented situations, and, unprecedented growth. So right from, on one hand, pent-up demand to there was also, speculative buying and pantry loading, which is how, the initial phase of demand came in. I'm talking about food. So April, May were that. June, July was again, a bit of speculating buying because April, May, people were literally running from one to other shop to buy food, processed food especially, because very little was available. Whatever was available was being lapped up. And every time you went out, whether you required it or not, you said, okay, let me, keep it. It's food. If not today, I'm going to consume it tomorrow. And processed food has a relatively longer shelf life, and hence, they are comfortable with the idea of stocking it. Also, there were, lockdowns which were happening, and initially lockdowns were strong. So that's how demand came in, and it continued to be very robust, and it kept growing till about July. But that was, as I said, unprecedented. It would be wrong to compare the current demand with those times with things opening up. I think the ideal way of looking at current demand would be how is the current demand compared to the pre-COVID times. So, demand till March. Now, if I'm talking about demand which is there currently, it still is higher than pre-COVID times. I'm talking about food especially. And it's not going to be as high as probably, what it was in April, May, June, July. The reason is as things open up, you have more options. There were hardly any options, and that's something that I have stated earlier as well, that restaurants were closed. Roadside food was not available.
That food demand has returned to pre-COVID levels? Are you saying food demand has returned to pre-COVID levels?
So food demand is higher than pre-COVID levels. The total food demand is higher, and might be a certain category may not be growing at. So I'm just giving an example. Suppose pre-COVID the demand was 5 to 7% growth, in demand. The growth went up till almost 30, 40, 50%, and in some categories even higher than that. That is now tapered down to 20, 25%, but it's still higher than the pre-COVID times, is what I'm trying to say. And that's bound to happen because the options which were not there in the first 2 or 3 months during lockdown are now available. So roadside stalls are opening up, restaurants have opened up, takeaway is, prevalent, and people are having not, eaten outside for this many months. I have started, going back, and probably, I think initially when it opens up, there's a little bit of euphoria and they would rush out and, buy it a little more. So net, the demand still is strong. It's higher than the pre-COVID level. Of course, not as high as probably, April, May, June, July. But yes, it's higher, significantly higher than that of pre-COVID times.
So the, let's all cook at home sort of euphoria may be receding. But another important point that was in the Nielsen report, and Mayank, I want your take on this, is when they have spoken to top managers who now say their focus is on middle India, seeing the tailwinds there, and product innovation. Can you identify with that narrative? Have you seen that yourself?
Yeah, completely. And the reason is, while, for certain categories, rural India is very important. But if I'm talking largely about FMCG, I think over and above rural India, compared to metros, the less affected areas are, outside metros, but, urban areas. So tier 1, tier 2 towns and those. There, I think situation is relatively better compared to probably a metro. Also, the kind of lockdown that we have. So, if I have to give an example of Bombay, as long as the locals are not plying, city is more or less at the standstill. And, economic activity is hampered, which is not the case with small towns. I think, commute is not really such a big hassle out there, and people can easily come. So things have relatively, they have been better there. Things have opened up also because of lesser density of population. I think naturally they have been, relatively isolated from the kind of onslaught that metros saw in terms of numbers and stuff like that. Given that, I feel the growth will come, from there. The consumption also, because they are less affected, there is better buying, more buying, and better demand coming in from there compared to metros. So even we are seeing that trend, that the kind of growth that we are seeing is largely coming from other urban areas other than metros. So tier 1, tier 2 towns, and to a certain extent, as I said earlier, rural as well. It depends from category to category. So in our category, it's also coming from rural along with non-metros, tier 1, tier 2 towns.
Of course. Mr. Ray, another very important aspect of what was in your report, and I think we should talk about this, is the increase in the use of e-commerce, the increased comfort with e-commerce, even outside your 6 major metros, etc. Of course, e-commerce is still just about 3% of the pie, so minuscule. But tell me a bit about the growth that you have seen.
In fact, e-commerce, and it's just not the COVID period. Actually, before the COVID period as well, we have seen and we have witnessed the early signs of e-commerce adoption in the TC1, which is the town plus 1, tier 1 to 10 lakh towns, and the rest of urban that we to call the smaller towns, right? So it was there. It was before the COVID as well. What COVID period has done is, and because of this contactless behavior and people not going out, the e-commerce obviously had its spike. which across all town classes, and the smaller town classes had it has just increased over there, or rather gained momentum, the momentum which has started before the COVID period as well.
We will have to see how demand grows forward. Will it go beyond FMCG? Because frankly, that's where the big question is. And Mr. Ray, if you can quickly give me a perspective of beyond FMCG, because that is literally bread and butter. Demand of that will be consistently high. Overall consumer demand, is there any insights you would like to share?
The overall consumer demand, okay, as I said in the beginning, there's an affordability reset, right? There is a tension that the consumers have in terms of affordability because of the overall market situation, and we know that, right? Hence, the overall consumer demand, we are not anticipating it to go up. It's going to stay muted for some time now. But in the FMCG, and particularly in the essentials, this has a different reset altogether. So people would be buying more of essentials and health and hygiene and immunity products, and people would be spending more on that. But the overall consumerism, I would say it will be muted for some more time.
All right, and that's the key point that we need to focus on. Well, thank you so much for talking with us and checking in on consumer sentiment. We keep testing those temperatures, Mr. Ray and Mayank.